Awesome. Well, this morning I have the pleasure just to share with you guys, and here in a few weeks we are preparing to cross the river and head over to West Lafayette and start a new move of God's Spirit to reach people who are far from Him at River City Church in West Lafayette. And so you might hear me talk about some different things in relation to that. But this morning I want to talk to you and encourage you and challenge you. Is that all right? So if you came in this morning, you got steel-toe boots on, you can just take those off. All right? We're just going to let God step on our toes if He has to, get our attention if He has to, and I want to really encourage you this morning. And that is, I want to talk about from here to there. Every one of us, God has on some type of trajectory in our lives. He is moving us from where you are now to where you need to get to go. And hopefully in 5 years and 10 years, you're not where you are now. Just like I would hope that where you are now, you weren't 5 or 10 years ago. And we see this in Scripture, how God is constantly moving His people from where they are to where He needs them to be. From here to there. God has done this here at our church, where He is constantly moving us from where we are to where we need to be. From here to there. And here in a few short weeks, when we launch River City Church in West Lafayette, we will be journeying out into uncharted territory for this church. We're going to be doing something that we've never done before. And sometimes when you pioneer something like that, that might feel a little scary, or you might feel unsure. But today I'm going to really show you how God is there even then. Sometimes in this life, we feel stuck with where we're at. You feel stuck in that job that you have to go report to maybe tomorrow morning. You feel stuck, and we stand at a distance and we look at our life and we wish we had a different one. Or we would like to leave here for somewhere else. Maybe we want to leave here for something better, because after all, what we see and feel, what we do every day, it just isn't working anymore. We're just stuck. We feel stuck, like life is passing us by, like there's something else better out there, and we just happen to be missing it. I heard a story recently about a guy who went to get a rental car. And he went into this rental car company, went to the counter, and the lady on the other side of the counter that was helping him, he just couldn't help but notice just how good she was at her job. Have you ever encountered someone like that? Maybe you're at the grocery store, maybe you're in a restaurant, and it stands out to you just how good they are. Well, that was what this guy encountered. This lady was so good at what she did. And so he began to tell her, you are really good at what you do. I mean, are you the owner? She's like, no, I'm not the owner. He's like, you really act like you own this place. And he goes to find out that this lady wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch an hour-long train ride, to get on a bus, to take the bus to the closest stop near this place of work, to walk the rest of the way to work. And then after a full day, gets back on the bus, rides back to the train station, takes the hour-long drive, and walks the rest of the way home. 3.5 hours of commute every day. And yet there she stands on the other side of the counter with a smile on her face. And she looks right at me and says, no, you don't understand. This is the busiest location in the area. And then she says these words, and this is where I start. This is where I start. In other words, it kind of gives some implications to her actions. That she knew she wasn't stuck with right where she was at, but she was thrusting herself into the everyday, knowing that she was on a trajectory for something greater, but she owned right where she was at. And someone here this morning needs to hear that. Someone here this morning, you need to go back to your workplace. You need to get back into that marriage, that relationship, and you need to say, no, this is where I start. I'm not done yet. I'm not quitting. There is more for me, but right now I own where I'm at. So how do we get from where we are? How do we go from here to there? Well, I would encourage you to just repeat that to yourself over and over again this week. When you reach difficulty, just say, no. This is only where I start. God's not done with me yet. I'm not going to quit. I have only begun. This is where I start. And when I think about what God is leading our church to do in starting a brand new movement, a brand new site, River City Church, West Lafayette, I can't help but think about Joshua. And so this morning we're going to look at the story of a man named Joshua in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. We're going to pick up at the part of the story where the Israelites are about ready to cross over the river into a new place. Well, we kind of have to look back to see how they got to where they are to really understand the implications of what's going on here. You see, the Israelites had ended up in slavery in Egypt, not just for a short time, but for 400 years. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Bible story about how Moses came and he convinced Pharaoh, and there was 10 plagues, and then the Israelites got to leave Egypt, and then they reached the Red Sea. You remember this story? And God split the Red Sea. They crossed over on dry ground, and with the promise of going to a land that would officially be theirs. Because when you're a slave, you don't own anything. You're owned. And that is where God's people found themselves. And so they had great faith. They were like, let's do this. We're going to be free. We're going to have a land that's all of our own. And then they crossed that Red Sea into a wilderness where they would wander for 40 years. 40 years. Where they had every opportunity to believe that was their new fate. That is where they were stuck. That was their final destination, and there was no more moving from here to anywhere else. This is it, 40 years. And then we reach this point in the story. Moses now is dead, but it's still not over yet. Well, check out what it says in Joshua chapter 1, verse 2. It says, Moses, my servant, is dead. This is God speaking to Joshua. And he says, now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan into the land I'm about ready to give them to the Israelites. And then God tells Joshua this, I will give you every place where you set your foot. As I promised Moses, your territory will extend. And I'm believing that for our church. I'm believing that with this initiative we have of crossing the river into West Lafayette. I'm believing in faith that God is looking at us and he says, I will give you every place you set your foot. That you're going to extend your territory. Listen, this isn't about River City Church. This is about extending the kingdom of heaven here on earth. This isn't about the name River City. This is about the name of Jesus. The name above all names, the name by which I'm saved, the name by which you are saved, but the name by which has healed us and delivered us and set us free. I just want to say that it is worth it. It's worth going through the river when God says to go. So I would say it like this: you receive where you're willing to go. God will give you every place that you set your foot. I remember when I was in high school, I'd walk through my hallways, young person. I'd walk through my hallways just saying, it is mine. This is for the kingdom of heaven. Everywhere I set my foot, I'm taking back for the kingdom of heaven. And in the same way, we're moving forward in this church. And when I say church, I hope you understand that you're the church. I hope you understand that it is your feet that march through the marketplace every week. It is your feet that march through neighborhoods all across this county. And God is saying, I will extend the territory of my kingdom through the feet of my church. And so you have to be willing to go. You will receive where you're willing to go. We have to first be willing. I remember I was on the phone with my mom several years ago, and in conversation, she mentioned to me that she was going to get rid of her piano. But I said, you're getting rid of my piano? I'm like, Mom, you've had that piano since before I can even remember. It's always been in your house. I learned how to play piano on that piano, and you're just gonna get rid of it? And she says, well, I'm trying to. She tried to sell it. No one would buy it. She tried to give it away. Nobody would take it. So she said, I'm just gonna take it out back and burn it. I'm like, are you nuts? You're gonna burn my piano. And then she told me this. She says, it's yours if you'll come and get it. Now, this piano was made in 1905. It stood about this tall, and it weighed about 900 pounds. So you know what I did? I drove myself to Northeast Ohio. I rented myself a U-Haul truck, and I got about an army of people to pick up this piano and put it in the back of that truck and drove it back to Indiana, and where I found a second army of people to lift it and bring it into my house, because after all, on my way there, I knew it was mine, but I had to go get it. You see, God has things in store for your life, and it's already yours. You got to go get it. If there was $1 billion buried in your backyard, do you own it? Yes, you do. But do you possess it? No, you don't. God has buried a treasure in your backyard. And someone today, you're gonna have an opportunity to unbury that treasure for the first time. You're gonna be able to maybe make a response for the first time today and commit your life to the Lord Jesus Christ. Make him Lord of your life. I know that when I made him Lord of my life, I hit the jackpot. But it's already yours. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to pay for it. He paid for it with his shed blood. It is yours for the taking. And with that, there's implications of the freedom that you get to have in Christ. The ability to move from where you are at to where God is going to take you. Across the river Jordan into a land that is already yours. It is yours for the taking. Proverbs 16:9 says this. It says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Have you ever made a really good plan and it failed? Have you ever made what you thought was a really great career opportunity, but then you lost it? Have you ever made what you thought were some really good financial investments and it went upside down on you? Have you ever went all in for a relationship and they left you? You see, our plans sometimes fail. But if you continue to leave where you're at and step out in faith, no matter what happened to your plans, God always works it out for the greater good. The Lord will establish your steps. Though you make plans, yeah, that's good. But if you just step out in faith, you remember faith is a sight that we have without seeing. We step, God places our steps. I would say it like this, that the Lord determines the destination, but only you determine the departure. You will always stay right where you're at if you never depart from where you are. If you want to go further into God's calling and purposes for your life, you control the departure. And sometimes what keeps us from departing, what keeps us from taking that first step is that we don't know what the 17th step is. Because I don't know what the 17th step is and I don't know where I'm going, sometimes it causes a little anxiety about taking that first step. But God is saying to Joshua, I will determine the destination. You just determine the departure, and I will give you every place that you set your foot. You know, there's something that is quite terrifying sometimes about unfamiliarity. Whether, if you think back to when you were in the school age and you go that first day of school, I remember always feeling anxious and timid. And I hate to admit this, but I remember in the 4th grade, I cried every single morning. And my teacher would make me sit out in the hallway because I was a disruption to the class. Like, that's how anxious I was. And maybe you were anxious walking into this room this morning because maybe you've never been to church before or you've never been to this church before. There's something that causes some anxiety or pressure in unfamiliar situations. And yet God is looking at Joshua and he's saying, I want you to go somewhere you've never been before. And so this is what the Lord says. He tells Joshua, knowing this, he tells him, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And then he says these words, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and courageous. Do you want to leave where you are and get to where God wants you to be? Be strong and courageous. And I would say this, that God demands strength and courage. He demands strength and courage. That seems quite strong. I'm like, God, you're coming on really strong there. And when I read this, I'm like, man, he is telling Joshua, be strong and courageous. Look at it. In Joshua 1:6, he says, be strong and courageous. And then in Joshua 1:7, he says, be strong and very courageous. And then in Joshua 1:9, he says again, did I not tell you? Be strong and courageous. Someone needs to nudge their neighbor right now and tell them, be strong. Go ahead, you got my permission. Nudge your neighbor, tell them, be strong. If you're sitting next to your spouse, nudge him again and say, did I not tell you? Don't act like you don't say that. Did I not tell you, be strong and courageous? I thought about that. And I thought about, God, when would there be a time that I would look at my children and demand them to be strong and courageous? And then it hit me. I remember when my boys were young, our twins were little, and I remember being at the pool. And I remember my son Joel standing on the edge of the pool, and I in the water. Him having full knowledge that the depth of the water was beyond his head, and that his swimming ability lacked enough that if he were to fall into that deep water, that he would have no way out. But yet he stood on the edge, and I stood in the water, and I would reach out my hands, and I would say, all right, buddy, jump. And frozen in fear and terror, he would just freeze. He wouldn't budge. He wouldn't move. And I would say, no, seriously, I got you. Jump. And he wouldn't jump. And then, being the wonderful parent I am, I'm like, we'll go home if you don't jump off the edge of that pool. Here comes the threats and I'm like, you need to jump because I know I have the strength to catch you. I know I have the ability where you don't. Nothing is going to happen to you, buddy. Just jump. And I demanded him because I knew I had the outcome. And when God demands you to be strong and courageous in your life, it is because he controls the outcome. And when God controls the outcome, you can be brave. You can be brave. And in that moment, he had to he had to have the guts, take the initiative, and leap off that step and step towards his father. And then he just had to bear it long enough between his last step on the ground and to the moment he landed in my arms. And in that moment, that first jump, when you land in your father's arms, you realize, I'm stronger than I thought I was. I can do that. Let's do that again. 30 minutes later, again. And you're like, my word, child, my arms are tired. Because you got that confidence boost when you know your father has got it. That's kind of how obedience with God the Father works. The more obedient that you become, the easier or more aware you are of the fact that he's got it. And I'm willing to step out because I know my father has all the control. I remember there was a time when I was my son's age, and I was with my granddad, and we were in the mountains of Pennsylvania. He had a hunting cabin up there. It was very, very, very remote. Dirt roads, no electricity. If something happened to you, good luck. And I remember we were hiking through the mountains, and there was this creek that went through the mountains. At this point, it was like late winter, so like the water was rising really high. And when that would happen, the creek would kind of create new paths along the ground. And then what would happen was it would create temporary islands where the water would separate. And so my older brother Josh and I, we thought it would be a great idea to like island hop, like we're jumping from this side to that side, and we kept hopping to these different islands till we got to a point where we knew we were stuck. You see, we jumped from a place that was high to an island that was low when there was no going back. And so we reached the other side of this little temporary island where the water was crossing, and the distance was a little further than we have yet gone. And the landing was a little higher than we were. And so being a good little brother, I looked at my big brother and said, "Hey, you first, dude." And I stepped back. And sure enough, I watched my older brother. He ran, he jumped, he gave all he had. He landed with one foot on that bank, drug his back leg through the water, and immediately was like, "That's cold." That water had to be like 40 degrees. That was my turn. I'm not as strong. I'm not as able. I'm not as athletic. I just happen to be more good looking than him. And I step back, and then I hear the voice of my granddad. He says, "Devin!" And my ears perk up. I feel a little confident. He says, "You're a goner!" I'll show you. And I ran, I gave it all I had. I probably only made it 3/4 of the way across that water. As soon as my feet skimmed the top, I immediately went waist high. To which my granddad then said, "It's gonna be a cold walk home for you, boy." I'm so glad that we have a father who encourages us to be strong and courageous. And he's not standing at a distance wishing you well. He's in the water saying, "It's over your head, but if you jump, I'll catch you." And you can be brave and strong in knowing that where you lack, I make up the difference. And I will control your destination, but only you control your departure. Will you jump? God demands strength and courage. So Joshua, filled with this new sense of confidence, he goes, "All right, let's go." And in Joshua, in verse 10, it says, "So Joshua ordered the officers of the people." He said, "Go throughout the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready." And some of you are about ready to embark on a new journey that God is putting you on. And his word to you this morning is, get ready. Get ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here and go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. So after 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp giving orders to the people, and the orders were this: when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out. Help me out and say, move out. You are to move out from your positions and follow it. Check this out. The Ark of the Covenant, to them, it was, to kind of paint a picture of what it was this box covered in gold. Inside of it held the tablets of the 10 Commandments, and it is said to contain the manifest, the actual presence of God. So essentially, what Joshua is saying is, he's telling the people, when the presence of God moves out, follow the presence of God. Follow the presence of God every time. But he goes on, follow the presence of God because of this. Then you will know which way to go. How do I know which way to go? Sometimes I don't. I just follow the presence. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark, which is several football fields. Keep a distance from the ark. And I would say to you like this, that God is way ahead of you. God is way ahead of you. When he's calling you out from where you are to take you to a place you've never been, you can be strong and courageous. You can be bold and brave because he's way ahead of you. which means that when you encounter something, it's not something that he hasn't already encountered. When you hit an obstacle, it means you're not hitting an obstacle that he hasn't already taken care of. And sometimes maybe you're like, man, I took some bold steps, I moved out, and then all of a sudden I moved out from where I was, and I was all pumped about this journey. I was all pumped about this job. I was all pumped about marriage. I was all pumped about being a dad. I was all pumped about being a mom. And then all of a sudden, you see the Jordan River. Look at what it says about it. It says, now the Jordan was at flood stage, all during harvest. In other words, they moved out. I'm strong, I'm courageous, let's go, let's do this. And then immediately you face an obstacle that you can't overcome. Immediately it gets difficult. Oh man, I've so been there. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away. What I find so intriguing is that when they saw the Jordan at flood stage, they didn't retreat. When they saw the Jordan at flood stage, they didn't think, well, we missed it. This wasn't the voice of God. They saw the Jordan at flood stage, which meant it should have been impossible to cross. And then they put their feet in the edge of the water, which means God hadn't split it yet. They said, if God said so, we're going in deep. And when their feet touched the water's edge, all of a sudden, they crossed on dry ground. That is strength and courage. Do not be deterred by doubt at the water's edge. Put your toes in the water. Follow the presence of God. And when you know you're following the presence of God, you'll be courageous like that. And I would say this, don't equate difficulty with defeat. Too many times when we set out on a journey, maybe you're newlywed, maybe you've been married for a long time, maybe you're in a career or a new job, or you're starting college. And the moment it gets difficult, we want to settle for defeat. Do not equate difficulty or defeat. Allow difficulty to elevate your dependency on God. Difficult times, it's just time to depend more on God. God is way ahead of you. Move out after him. So let's take a look at what happens next in Joshua 4 through 6. So Joshua called together 12 men. He had them appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and he said to them this, he said, go over before the ark of the Lord into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of the Israelites to serve as a sign among you. And church, this is what I would say about that. I would say that we all have stones to carry. We all have stones to carry. I would say that God is not done with what he started here in this church. You're the church. He's not done. But collaboratively, we all have stones to carry. In other words, we all play a part. I think it's easy to show up and look at the building and think, well, they must have it all taken care of. My little stone doesn't matter, but it does. We all have stones to carry. And I am so thankful that here in this church, we have such a rich history. This church has been in this community for over 90 years now. That means none of you are here. 90 years in this community, and it all started when Sister Seipel, let me get this right, and Sister Seipel and Sister Risk, two ladies, decided to move out from where they were and start a prayer meeting. And they met together and they prayed together. And from those prayer meetings, we have the church that you and I are part of today, 90 years later. I'm thankful that somebody said, I will pick up a stone and I will carry it. God has been good through the years, and God's not done yet. We still have stones to carry. There are still stones that need to be picked up. I'm so thankful that in the early 1950s, this church hit a river at flood stage. This church hit difficult times. In the early 1950s, this church found themselves without a pastor, a building that was not finished on Greenbush, and yet, in the face of that difficulty, the members of this church in the early 1950s chose to pay double tithe. Double tithe, because they believed that it was their stones to carry. They believed that God wasn't done yet, that they didn't settle for where they were then, but they said, no, we're going from here to there. And they paid double tithe. And then some even took out life insurance policies on each other, made the church the beneficiary, so you couldn't even die to get out of it. And there, in that church on Greenbush Street, Jim, was where you walked in on that Sunday night. And you were brought from darkness into light. And now your children's children are still a part of that same move of God. Because someone chose to carry some stones. And when we carry the load, when we share the load, faithfulness to carry the load leads to building something that lasts. That's what we get to be a part of. So church, come on, grab a stone, sling it up on your shoulder, and let's go to the other side. I'm so thankful that we have a team of people who have committed to pick up a stone and go to the other side and help start a new work in West Lafayette. But my challenge to you this morning is, what stone are you carrying? We all play a part. We all play a part. And faithfulness to carry the load leads to building something that lasts. Because here's what happened. Those 12 men carried those 12 stones. They crossed the Jordan River to the other side. When they got to the other side, they all took their stones, they put them all together, and they built something. And it says in Joshua chapter 4, verse 6, it says, in the future, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. In other words, I would say it like this. When you carry your stones, all of us, when we carry our stones, and we collaboratively put those stones together, what we build is that we build something that stands for generations. It's our children and our grandchildren who will reap the benefits of stones we carry. It's your children who will have healthy relationships with their future spouses because they saw the stones you carried in your relationship with your spouse now. It is the stones we carry, and it is our children who are the beneficiaries of it. We are the beneficiaries of generations who went before us in this church and in this community. And together we get to build something for generations to come. So please, I beg you, don't quit. Someone wants to quit. Someone is burnt out. Someone feels used up. Someone doesn't want to give. Someone doesn't want to serve. Don't quit. Don't quit. For the sake of my children and your children, your grandchildren, my children will see what we build. My children will see what I build with my legacy and our family and my lifetime. And I would say this, what we build in our lifetime, it matters. It matters. So thrust yourself into the everyday mundane. Thrust yourself into that seemingly flood stage difficulty. Get your toes in the water and just say, this is where I start. This is where I start to build. This is where I start picking up a stone to carry it. You get where you're willing to go. Are you willing to go? Will you be brave? So church, I say move out from where you are. Let's go from here and let's go to there. Let's go. May your life build something that matters. I don't know about you, I'm excited. I'm excited for my life. I'm excited for this church. I'm excited for the day that we live in. Move out from where you are. And though we don't know where we're going, God directs our steps, but we're choosing to depart. It's for his name's sake. You know, Jesus was the greatest example of what it means to be willing to go. You know, it was Jesus who chose to leave his throne in heaven, join humanity on earth. It was Jesus who was willing to live the perfect life that you and I could never live. It was Jesus who was willing to go to the cross. It was Jesus who was willing to die the death of a criminal, being that he was the most innocent man that's ever walked the face of the earth. It was Jesus who took the punishment for my mistakes and my failures. It was Jesus who was willing to bleed and to die, paying the price for those mistakes. You see, the reason why we have a God like that is because when he looked at broken humanity, when he looked at the mess of your life and he saw the mess of my life, he didn't give us what we deserve. You know, Paul says in Romans that we are all by nature subjects of wrath. In other words, we all deserve judgment. That's what I deserve. For my mistakes and my failures, I deserve his judgment. But instead, he came, did not give me what I deserved. He only saw me for what I was worth. And it was worth it to him to go. It was worth it to him to go to that cross, to bring me freedom, of which I didn't deserve in the first place. And that's what he's offering to you this morning. Maybe you're here today and you've never made a decision to follow Christ. And maybe you struggle with that decision because you know you're not deserving of it. But God is speaking to you this very day saying, but son, daughter, you were worth it. And he was willing to go all the way for you. You know, when I found Christ, I hit the jackpot. I did. I won the lottery when I found him. And so in return, my life is a constant testament of that, which is total surrender to him, saying, God, now I'm willing to go.